Welcome back to the book of Revelation. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 8, verses 7 through 12. We're going to look at all four, or the first four trumpets. They have something in common, which is that it's about space, something that comes out of space or something that's happening in space. So let's pray. Father, I pray that the horror of this text will drive as many as possible to your grace so that they can not take part in what's going to be seen today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I'm not kidding when I say that. I was serious when I prayed that this would scare people into running to Jesus, because that's the reason he showed it to us, so that we would say, I don't want to be part of that. It's certainly not the reason for us to glory in what's going to happen to people left behind. It's a terrible thing. But by this time, those who are going to experience it have completely rejected any offer of grace. And all that's left for them then is judgment. And in mercy, God is going to send obvious judgment that's coming from him, not from man, on them so that they will return to him. That's always his goal, is repentance and salvation. Let's read the whole text, go back and look at the trumpets one by one. Verse 7, the first trumpet sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all of the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. Men here in this context and throughout really the rest of Revelation is really humans. It's men and women, children. It means human beings. The fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck. So the third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. So these are things out of man's control. There's nothing he can do about it. It's interesting that lately, well, not lately, the last really 30, 40 years, perhaps longer, we've had a number of movies that the basis of the movie is that something is coming out of the sky, an asteroid. Usually it's an asteroid, and man is trying to divert its course and keep it from destroying the earth. Well, it's not going to work. And by this time also, we've had the first 6 seals that have really disrupted the infrastructure of the world. So I don't know that man could do anything about it if they tried and if they wanted to. Now they may try, but it's not going to work. Maybe it will work with the first one. So the first sounded. Now, when I talk about this, understand that this is how I see it. There is, and I see it physically and literally in a sense, but it's physically, it's not a metaphor for some spiritual thing that's going to happen at the end of time. Person can get a spiritual teaching from it, I suppose, but that's not what I'm doing. So I want to look, I like to see naturally what's going on. So I'm going to try to see that. I may not get it right. We don't know that. We will one day. But my goal is to make it, although it's supernatural, I want it to look natural as much as I can. So verse 8. Verse 7, the first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. So first of all, about that, they're outside of the earth. They're thrown to the earth. So this is an action really by God or by one of his angels that causes this to fall on the earth. It comes from space. It's not a natural storm. It's a supernatural storm. Before we talk more about this, I'd like to look at kind of a background text in the Old Testament because we're warned about all of this in the Old Testament, and we see some examples. But first of all, Micah chapter 7, verse 15. As in the days when they came out from the land of Egypt, I will show you miracles. That kind of is the basis. A lot of this reminds us of what happened in Egypt, and he's saying that what I did there, I'm going to do again. So let's look at Exodus chapter 9, verses 23 through 28. That gives us an idea of what he did in Egypt that corresponds with this particular trumpet. Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, and Yahweh sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. So it's missing the blood, but everything else is there. And Yahweh rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very severe, such as had not been in the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck all that was in the field through all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. And so this was a supernatural thing. I don't know if this came from space, like the one we're looking at in Revelation, but it was supernatural in that this horrible storm hit Egypt except for one spot. And it came from God, and Israel was protected by God. Isaiah 28:2. Behold, the Lord has a strong and mighty agent, as a storm of hail, a tempest of destruction, like a storm of mighty overflowing waters. He has cast it down to the earth with his hand. So here we see this very action, that he's thrown this storm from space onto the earth. And then Joel chapter 2, verse 30. I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke from all the burning in this particular trumpet. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of Yahweh comes. And it will come about that whoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be delivered. Paul quotes this verse in the midst of this cataclysmic event in his great chapter on grace and salvation, Romans chapter 10. And there in the Greek version it says, and it will come about that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so in the midst of this terrible thing, in the very last day, remember, everybody that seemed like they were going to be saved has been saved and has been raptured, but still God is waiting to hear them call on him, and that's all he needs. They'll be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as Yahweh has said, even among the survivors whom Yahweh calls. So there will be a remnant that escapes all this terrible catastrophe. Ezekiel 5:12. Before I read this, I want to tell you why we've turned here. You probably noticed that it kept saying something happened to a third, to a third, to a third. Actually, 12 times in the verses that we read, it says that there's a third. And you may say, yeah, right, like it's going to be divided into a third with all of these. But that's the point. It's God doing this, and he divides it into a third. And that third, though it's terrible for that, it says there's 2/3 that aren't affected by it. So in God's judgment, we see God's mercy. And the idea of judgment and mercy comes from Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 12. 1/3 of you will die by plague or be consumed by famine among you. 1/3 will fall by the sword around you. And 1/3 I will scatter to every wind, and I will unsheath my sword behind them. So it's 2/3 there that are going to die, and the others are going to be scattered. But here it's 1/3, but 12 times. So this is going to pile up. So we're talking about a lot of destruction on the earth and about a lot of death. So again, the first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So this is a particular scourge that hits the earth. What is it? And nobody knows what this is, but it comes out of space. We'll see this in later on, but or maybe where those huge hailstorms come from that we talked about in the last section. A good deal of the asteroids, which are made out of water. I think that most astronomers believe that the asteroids were formed when the tidal force of Jupiter and the tidal force of the Sun and little Mars, and they're between Mars and Jupiter, destroyed a planet. It just split apart into rocks, but a lot of it is water. So it was a planet that had water like the Earth. And so if one of those, a big chunk of ice or chunks of ice kind of coming in a flotilla, hits the atmosphere, starts to burn and break up, it will be a rain of hail on the Earth, as well as fire with the iron and whatever else is in the asteroid. Where does the blood come from? I don't know. It's all horrific to think of. Is it from the birds? Is it from the airplanes? Is it some substance that was in that planet? Did that planet have life? There isn't any reason why other planets don't have life. I don't know about sentient life. Certainly not, at least in our solar system, what we would call aliens. But maybe it had life when it exploded. Whatever happened to it? And is it blood coming down from that? I don't know. Or is it just blood that God has put into it? Like the water in Egypt that turned into blood. Nobody knows, but it's a horrific thing. And the problem, though, is not so much the hail here as the fire that comes down and hits the earth and burns up a third of the earth, and a third of the trees were burned up. It's a lot of lumber, a lot of fruit. Then all the green grass was burned up. Now, this is one of those things that I really can't picture that. But again, it's the grace of God that it's a third of the trees, a third of the earth, the land. And so there'd be lots of houses and probably cities in this involved as well. But not all the grass at any given time of the year is going to be green. Some of it's going to be brown and in dormant. So that grass, I guess, doesn't burn, except if it's in the third of the earth. But all the rest of the grass, for some reason, burns up. But the good thing, the blessing of that is grass grows back. You can burn a field, and next year, it will come back. So that's the first one. Great deal of mystery in that. The second one is not so mysterious. It's pretty obvious. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. So this is, again, an asteroid. Comes down in one chunk, like a burning mountain. Notice that it says here it's like a burning mountain, so it wasn't a burning mountain. It looked to John like a burning mountain. He's never seen an asteroid come out of space and land in the sea. Again, this is thrown down, so something has diverted the course of this asteroid, just like something diverted the course of whatever was verse 7 was about. Something or someone, God, probably diverted the direction of this asteroid and threw it into the sea. So it comes down burning like meteors do and like an asteroid would, but it hits with way more power than any meteor that we've ever experienced, because the outcome of it is a third of the sea became blood. Now, why? Because a third of the creatures which were in the sea had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So there, again, with the blood, either it's just created by God, like in the water turning to blood, or it makes more sense that it's the result of this asteroid that hits and just destroyed so much sea life. Again, it's just a third. Now the sea is probably not like the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. It's probably the Mediterranean Sea. Biblically, when they talked about the sea, they meant the Mediterranean Sea. They weren't aware of the Atlantic or the Pacific, to my knowledge. So it lands in the Mediterranean, kills a third of the life in the Mediterranean. And you can imagine the tsunami that is generated by that, and that will probably be felt, maybe not worldwide, but a lot farther than Europe and the Middle East and Africa. The fact that a third of the ship, 2/3 of the ship remain or not destroyed is amazing to me. I don't know how that happens. So I'd like to look at a few more verses from the Old Testament that relate to both of these, actually to probably all four, but especially to this one. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 12 to 17. For Yahweh of hosts will have a day of reckoning. We're in that day here in chapter 8. Against everyone who is proud and lofty, and against everyone who is lifted up, that he may be abased. And it will be against all the cedars of Lebanon that are lofty and lifted up, against all the oaks of Bashan, against all the lofty mountains, against all the hills that were lifted up, against every high tower, against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. The pride of man will be humbled, and the loftiness of man will be abased. So you can come back to this at a different time, or now just stop the video and look at this, that we've already seen most of this in the text that we have been looking at. But particularly in this case is verse 16. Tarshish to them was Shangri-La, the end of the earth. It's probably Spain, but it was somewhere exotic that really opened up to the outland, to the place where nobody knew. Hosea 4, 1 through 3. Listen to the word of Yahweh, O sons of Israel, for Yahweh has a case against the inhabitants of the land, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence, so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. So again, the fish of the sea disappearing is part of our particular trumpet, but I wanted to read this to show that there's a reason for this. And you can go back again and think about that reasoning. Zephaniah 1:3, not Zechariah, but Zephaniah 1:3. Zephaniah, I think, is a couple of books before Zechariah. Verse 2, I will completely remove all things from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh. When's he going to do that? Well, he's doing it in our text. I will remove man and beast. I will remove the birds of the sky, and that possibly is why it rained blood, and the fish of the sea, which we're seeing here, and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off man from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh. So, serious stuff. We were warned about it clear back in the book of Joel. Joel is probably the oldest of the prophets. I mean, he was the earliest of the prophets. So that's the second trumpet. Now for the third trumpet, which is in verses 10 and 11. The third angel sounded, and I heard, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch. And it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood. And many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. So a great star fell from heaven. Anything, to the ancient people, anything that wasn't the sun or the moon was a star. So the planets were wandering stars. And comets would be star, which I believe this is a comet, because what they called comets, the ancients called comets, was torches. Because they would have their bright head and then the tail following behind that they would see as the stick that holds the burning substance on the end of the torch. So this is a burning, a star that's burning like a torch, and that's what they would think. This is a comet. It fell on a third of the rivers and the springs of water. So how I vision it is that it doesn't hit like the one that landed in the sea, but it goes across either above the atmosphere or just in the atmosphere. And a comet is mostly ice, but this one obviously has a substance in it, which I'll talk about in a moment, that is dissipated into the atmosphere as it flies either past or flies through the atmosphere of the earth, so that it contaminated a third of the rivers and somehow fell on the springs of water. I don't know what that means. All the springs or a third of the springs. Does it mean the heads of streams or they come out that they were completely contaminated. That's probably what it means. Again, it's this third, which shows the mercy of God. The name of the star is called wormwood. In the Old Testament, the idea of wormwood is often used in judgment. God says he'll give them wormwood. I don't believe I wrote down those texts because there was already enough Old Testament for this, but you can look up the word wormwood in your concordance and just kind of follow it along. You'll see it's always in a context of judgment. What is wormwood? Wormwood is what we call absinthe. Now it's confusing what absinthe is, because in the 1800s there was a drink they called absinthe, and you may, if you're a reader, you would have read of it. It wasn't really an alcoholic beverage that had a little bit of a hallucinatory substance in it, but mostly it was alcohol. It was green with mint or something like that. And a lot of poets and artists drank it. I believe that was the drug of choice of Sherlock Holmes in the books and also in some of the TV shows. Was absinthe, but that is not this. That's not wormwood. They called it absinthe, but it was something else. Absinthe is a plant that it has an active ingredient in it that's called thujone, and that's like THC or CBD, more like THC. It is a hallucinogenic, and so some would take it. This is long before this. Thujone is not in the absinthe of the 1800s. But it's hallucinatory in nature, but you really don't want to take it because this is the side effects. And I'm just going to read this right from a medical journal. When taken by mouth, thujone can cause seizures, muscle breakdown, kidney failure, restlessness, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, vomiting, stomach cramps, dizziness, tremors, changes in heart rate, urine retention, thirst, numbness of arms and legs, paralysis, death. It's not recommended that you drink this, and yet a third of the water sources will have that substance in it, and the result is in verse 11, because that many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. So something in this comet has a substance like this that has the same sort of side effects that kill many people, probably unbeknownst to them. Verse 12, the fourth angel. Fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. Now in my youth, I tried to figure this out. I drew diagrams, I pondered it, and I couldn't figure it out. Every time that I would draw a diagram or think that I had a theory worked out, there'd be something that didn't work. So what does it mean that a third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck? So something happens, I don't know what, and that a third of them would be darkened. That would make kind of sense, but it just doesn't make sense that the moon and the sun and the stars are all darkened, a third of them at the same time. The day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. Now, some have believed that what this means is that the daytime is shortened. The day is shortened by a third. I don't know how that would work either, so I don't actually think that's what it is, so that all these things wouldn't happen, that you only have a 16-hour day instead of a 24-hour day. Maybe after all the catastrophe, maybe after that asteroid hitting the Earth, maybe it slows the spin of the Earth down. So that's a possibility. Other than that, I don't know. I did look into, I put it in another notebook. They're trying to figure out a way to send particles up into the sky that will dampen the effect of the sun to counteract global warming. they're not, they haven't even been able to send up a balloon to test the balloon that would send the particles out. By the way, no matter what your thinking is towards people, make sure that when you hear something about a person, that you look in to see if it's true. This is not Bill Gates' project. They have a like a huge GoFundMe that people can contribute to keeping this ethical, experimenting to make sure that they don't do something that they shouldn't, and controls on what they do. And Bill Gates has contributed to that. I'm just telling you that because it's annoying to me when people post lies about other people. Doesn't matter whether you like them or not. So he did not invent this. He just funded an ethics committee to make sure they do it right. That's not a bad thing. But one person that wrote, another scientist, said that, okay, you're darkening the sky so that the sun doesn't shine. What can go wrong with that? So is that part of this? Who knows? I don't know. We're working on it. It does seem like these 4 trumpets are not man's doing. This is God's doing. So it's something beyond that, that we don't need to worry too much about global warming, at least at this time, because God's going to take care of that, and it's not going to be good. Really, maybe this is the end of this session, but when we're done, maybe you can think about the psychological impact of all of this, especially the last one, where the sun and moon and stars don't shine for a third of the time they would normally shine. How will that affect people that are still on the earth? Till next time, may God bless you.